But to specifically answer your question, climate justice is about fairness, is about adjusting to the climate change impacts in terms of how different entities within society are affected and how they're going to be compensated. So it's just a matter of looking at justice with a climate change or climate crisis lens. Climate change, the climate crisis has led to a lot of impacts, and these impacts are not being felt equally across the global north or the global south. And what climate justice attempts to do is to find ways to redress those wrongs and to recognize that the people suffering the most are the ones who caused the crisis in the first place. So it's a means of adjusting to it. And as I said, as we go along, I'll get a little more involved in terms of how climate justice is manifested in operations of organizations within the Caribbean and the global south.
Okay, Mr. Maximay, so thanks for that. I have a question though. So why is the topic of climate justice crucial for our region?
It's crucial for our region because we are experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis, whether it be sea level rise, increased temperatures, extreme events, and we need the resources to deal with it. And those resources ought to come in a just society. They ought to come from the perpetrators, so that one can look at climate justice in a retributive sense, in the sense that, okay, we are looking to punish the people who caused the problem. There's also a distributive angle to it, in the sense that you want to be able to provide the people who are suffering the most or being affected the most with the resources, the goods and services to adapt and to mitigate. And as I said, we'll in more detail a little later. But it's crucial because we are feeling the effects now, not just in the Caribbean, but in the Pacific as well. You know, you have a number of people living on atolls, these low-lying islands, and they're literally going to disappear. I mean, you know, talk about the Maldives, talk about what's happening here in the Caribbean as well. So it is crucial, it is urgent. There is a recognition that there's loss and damage, and when you have loss and damage, then there must be some means to compensate for infringing on those, on the rights of every human being on the planet.
Okay, so it sounds as though things are critical for small islands like the Caribbean region. And you spoke about some of these effects of climate change. So what are the effects that we are trying to address, and how is the climate justice aspect of that affecting our ability to address it?
Okay, great. So we are being impacted. The climate change impacts take a range of forms. There's sea level rise, there's saltwater intrusion, drought, extreme events, our inability to secure food for ourselves. In other words, there's a nutrition and food security dimension to it, that our agriculture is more difficult, whether it be in terms of the droughts, the increased wind patterns, and so have changed the circulatory patterns, so that you have now the egress or ingress of exotic pests and diseases that we were not prepared to deal with as yet. So that we have all of these impacts operating all at once. And we have to now either adapt in the sense of finding ways to literally survive, and also we have a commitment to mitigate. In other words, we have a commitment to reduce the greenhouse gases that cause the problems in the first place, that cause the global warming in the first place. So we are being asked to address some of these concerns, some of them from a purely survival point of view, because I mean, it is a matter of life and death. It's no longer climate change, it's a climate crisis. So we know, we experience it every day. You know, we know that things are changing, that we are in crisis mode, and we have to find ways, mechanisms to find the resources to do it. And I think climate justice, appeals to climate justice is just one aspect of how we find the resources, the goods and services to take us out of this very deep pit that we have fallen into due to no fault of our own. And we are going to require assistance, not just from a humanitarian point of view, but in terms of people addressing or redressing the wrongs that they have committed.
Okay, so I have one last question for you, just to drill down a little bit into what you just said. So you spoke about resources and we not having the resources that we would need to address climate change. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what some of those resources would be that we would be looking for as Caribbean small islands?
Yes. And as I said, remember, this is not about going cap in hand begging for the resources. We are literally entitled. There's a concept of atmospheric commons. In other words, we share the atmosphere with countries all over the world, right? So when you have countries in the global north polluting, emitting all those greenhouse gases, causing problems for us down here, there's a moral responsibility on their part to assist. There's a moral responsibility. If you think in terms of fairness and the old concepts of justice, there is a responsibility on the part of the polluters in the sense of a polluter pay type policy. When, even in a local context, if you have someone polluting your rivers, then there's a certain moral and legal responsibility for them to help redress it. And it's the same thing with atmospheric commons and global commons. We have not been the major perpetrators. But now that we are in a position where we require their assistance, then there's a moral, legal, fairness, retributive, restorative responsibility on the global south to assist. As I said, it's not a matter of going cap in hand. It's not as if you're begging them, but there is a moral responsibility on their part. And I say there, I mean global north and some of the major polluters in the past. So as I said, I want to drill down on this point that this is not about going cap in hand, right? There are mechanisms and justice principles that we are appealing to in terms of getting the redress that we need. And the resources will come in a sense of financial resources. But let's be quite clear. When you see a ribbon cutting ceremony or some sort of ceremony from the global north where you hear that a country, let's say Grenada or Barbados, is awarded a grant of $200 million US. Those $200 million US don't just go into the central bank and accumulate interest. We are going to have to use those $200 million US to buy goods and services from the same countries that have caused the problem in the first place. So as I said, climate justice, like ordinary justice, must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. And that is where the conversation widens in terms of, it's not just a matter of you coming and cut a ribbon and providing us with resources, but it has to do with the moral responsibility on their part. So the resources may come in the form of funds, adaptation or mitigating funds, but it's really goods and services that we are buying. And as we continue this discussion on climate justice, we will see where we should really be providing some of those goods and services ourselves. In other words, you don't want to be paying the person who caused you the pain to help solve your problems now, right? As if I can be very, very crude, it's think of it. Think of you walking down the street minding your business, and someone walks up to you and slashes you. I mean, anybody anywhere in the world will realize, okay, that's wrong. I didn't do anything. You slash me. I take you to court. I'm awarded a settlement, and lo and behold, I'm awarded a settlement for surgery, only to find out that the person who slashed me is a surgeon, and that's the person who's going to be earning the money. So even though there's a justice component, it doesn't seem like justice because I'm actually paying you to help me solve a problem that you caused. So when we get further into the discussion, I hope my more learned younger colleagues will be able to take us through that.